he gave me this compass, and I probably don't know how to use it all the correct way, but I keep it in my office just to remind me, like, what is my compass? And when leaders make their compass other people's responses, they lose their way.
I'm Trisha Taylor, and this is the Leader's Journey podcast. So here's my question. How's your immune system? How's your organization's immune system? Because every living system has an immune system, has that capacity to protect the self, the identity of the person or the organization from outside invaders, from pathogens, from unhealthy influences, and even from the body's own reactivity. And so the late Peter Steinke wrote a classic book called How Your Church Family Works. And if you haven't read this, it is a classic for a reason. But he talks about 7 ways that leaders can intentionally grow the capacity of their own immune system, their immunity to anxiety, to threats, and also to grow the immune system of the organization. And it's just a really fascinating, brief discussion at the end of that book that my colleague Mac McCarthy and I wanted to expand and to talk more about and to apply practically. And so in this pod, Mac brings his interest in this topic and also his experience as a pastor and also his very sharp insight. And he brings all that together with me in this conversation about exploring, so how do we strengthen our immune system? And so I'm glad you're here. I hope you enjoy. Hey, Mac, as always, lots of fun to get together to have this conversation. Yeah, I'm excited about starting a new series.
Yeah, me too. One of the things I didn't receive in my formal education was any exposure to Bowen family systems theory. It was a pretty massive gap. And so I've had to fill in that gap after, in the past 15, 20 years. And one of my practices for that is I just always am trying to read in that area. I've just made it a goal. I'm going to be a lifelong learner in this area, and I'm gonna consistently read. And I try to pick an author different, each year. So one year it was Roberta Gilbert. Last year it was Kathleen Smith, who, by the way, is just hilarious. I find her so funny. But this year,
and say anybody who's not on her Substack or getting her newsletter is missing out.
Yeah, she is so funny. This year I've been reading a gentleman named Peter Steinke.
Yeah.
And he was a psychologist, an educator, a pastor, worked underneath Edwin Friedman, studied under him, so pretty close to the center. And he was a consultant, and I just find him to be so incisive. He has a way of just taking complex topic situations and sort of distilling them down in ways that are crystal clear. He just cuts through all the noise and I think just presents things with such clarity.
Yeah.
And I was reading his book, How Your Church Family Works. And in that book, he names 7 health influencing responses to anxiety. And I just find myself coming back to these frequently. I think they show up a lot in how when I'm coaching clients and doing consulting, they just seem to be some really important principles that he presents there that I think are worth returning to and exploring again and again.
Yeah, I think that was Steinke's gift, is that he could take these pages and pages and pages of really dense text and come up with that, like you're saying, that incisive kind of angle, but also, and hey, leader, here's where you can focus. Here's where you can orient yourself again and again. And when you came to me with this idea about talking about these 7 things, the thing that was interesting to me is that, okay, first of all, this book is an absolute classic.
Hmm.
I reread it frequently. I still recommend it all the time. But also, this isn't like what we're talking about in this series is like the very last chapter. And it's kind of rare for some of the best stuff in a book to
Yes.
be at the very end.
Yeah.
And
Usually you want to hook readers at the beginning, right?
right, right. And that's where you put all your best stuff. And then here's this really, really rich material at the end. And I was so glad that you brought it back around. I think about so the whole chapter that this is in at the very end, remembering the future is the name of the chapter. Um, is kind of a way, I think, kind of a way of bringing it all together in a
Hmm.
way that we can really pay attention. And I think about that particular chapter has an idea in it that I have found to be incredibly helpful because when people come to us, they almost always have identified, if we're going to think about the organization as a living system, which is what this
Hmm.
is all about, they have identified kind of the pathogen, right? The virus or the cancer. Sometimes they even use that language in the organization, and they want us to fix that.
Hmm.
And at some point, I always ask the question, thanks to Steinke, tell me about the immune system of your organization.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that is a completely disorienting and reorienting question to ask.
Yeah, I think the context of these 7 health influencing responses is rooted in that immune system imagery that the church doesn't just run on strategy. And so our job as leaders isn't just to provide solutions. Rather, our churches and congregations function as emotional systems. And when anxiety bubbles up in our system, the leaders play a really important role in shaping that response. They either contribute to the anxiety or, as part of the a healthy immune response, they're able to lower that anxiety and that reactivity.
Yeah, it reminds me of that idea just in our human bodies. We certainly, went through all this during COVID and at other times where we get really, most of the time, we're not aware of our immune system at all. I mean, we are
Mhm.
exposed to so many things. And most of us, most of the time, don't get sick
Yep.
because our immune system is doing its job.
Yep.
And then when that fails, um, you know, in the organization, the congregation, the business, the family, whatever, to wonder why takes us from that linear blame focused approach to more of a systems view of the situation. And just kind of at the heart, the idea, just like in our human bodies, that what the immune system is supposed to do is to figure out what is self and how do we live according to that, and then how do we interact with everything that isn't self.
Yeah.
um
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a shift. That's a big shift. Maybe a story to illustrate it. It's May when we're recording this. And we just had a bunch of colds rifle through our home. Our kids got sick, Josie got sick. I was the only one who kind of dodged it. But it was really
You take all
interesting
those
because
cold plunges you do, Mac.
yeah,
That's
yeah, maybe. But my oldest son asked the linear question, who got me sick?
oh
He
yeah,
wanted
there you
he
go.
wanted to figure out who brought this into our home and gave it to me. And my wife Josie said to our son, you've been staying up really late
Mhm.
and you've been eating a lot of sugar and you've been working hard. And she started to name all these other variables that weaken the immune system. She's a nurse.
Uh-huh.
And said, so it's not as simple as, hey, someone just gave this to you. You've got to look, how much have you been sleeping? And are you drinking water? Like there's all these variables. Um, and I thought, what a great way to kind of highlight how we can go to that blame, shift to blame, and
Mhm.
prescribe a simple solution versus looking at the whole.
Yeah, yeah, that could be, on one level, it could seem like blame the victim, right? But it's
Hmm.
actually very different from that. It's let's get up to a high enough balcony to see the whole picture here. And just like your son's immune system might have been a little weakened in the face of whatever pathogen he was exposed to, and there was a complex interchange there. Organizations want to focus on, okay, who did something wrong?
Yeah, the
And
one thing.
yeah, the one thing, and let's fix that thing.
Hmm.
And when we go in and say, and what was the context in which this was able to happen? This doesn't happen in every organization
Hmm.
exactly this way.
Hmm.
It just completely shifts the conversation. And it's interesting to know which leaders and organizations can make that shift,
Yes.
versus the ones that have trouble with that. And so the idea of the immune system is identifying what is self, what is me, and that being the starting place. Friedman in particular describes how viruses and cancers and autoimmune diseases, kind of show us what happens when that doesn't work. So if we're going to somehow be able to interact with pathogens differently in our organizations and really, ourselves, and we are having this conversation on both levels, right?
Yep.
Like
Yep.
I want to look at how I am focusing on health improving behaviors, but I also want to lead my organization that way. At any rate, the idea of starting with self is not intuitive. It's not where
No.
most of us start.
No. I was hoping as we look at these 7 health influencing responses to maybe pair some of them together and sort of progress as we go through this series. And you're naming, I think, the starting point. Several of these responses he names focus on self, you're leading yourself.
Mhm,
There seem to be a handful that center around relating to others.
mhm,
Um, and then finally being able to navigate that system, see and navigate the entire system. And I think that is the foundation to focus on self, not others. A self, a differentiated self, a self that is defined and connected, to use our language,
uh-huh,
is responsive, but a non self, a non differentiated self is reactive.
mm,
And
mhm,
I think a differentiated leader responds with conviction and guiding principles, whereas an undifferentiated leader reacts
mhm.
oftentimes from anticipation,
Mm.
anticipated responses from other people.
Like they've already got their focus on scanning what everybody else is going to do.
Yeah, they're sort of constantly adapting around
Mm.
other people's expectations, and they become reactive and anxious and emotionally fused within the system because they're focused on other people and what they might be expecting or wanting, and how do I manage that versus who do I want to be in this moment. And so I think there's a powerful shift here that doesn't reduce social awareness, but doesn't center it in a way that determines how I show up. So if you're monitoring other people's um, emotions and actions constantly, if you're sort of adapting how you show up to other people's reactivity, I think that you're going to contribute to the anxiety rather than lower the anxiety.
Mm. Mhm.
Versus having some clarity on, here's what I think about this. Here's
Mm.
how I would define myself. Here's my guiding principles when it comes to this topic or this situation or that situation. It's a fundamentally different way to center yourself.
It's that idea of, I mean, it's so much in our own biology, right? That the cells need to be the kind of cell they are. They need to be able to define themselves and then be that. And when they can do that, that's when we're healthy. I think what you're describing, kind of that sense that leaders sometimes have of, so who do you need me to be?
Yes.
I'm here to be who you need me to be, and I have certainly fallen into that trap. That probably comes pretty naturally to me. Um, and
Yeah.
and then, yeah.
Yeah, my brother-in-law, he was in the Marines, and one
Okay.
Christmas he gave all of us. We always do a gift exchange, and he gave us like an old like compass.
Okay. So if you're just listening, you could go over to YouTube and see what Mac
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
holding.
Yeah, but
Mm,
he gave me this compass, and I probably don't know how to use it all the correct way, but I keep it in my office just to remind me, like, what is my compass? And
mm,
when leaders make their compass other people's responses,
mm.
they lose their way.
So give an example of that. What would it mean to make my
Sure.
compass other people's responses?
Yeah, I think one way I've been practicing this and promoting this across our leadership team, and we talked about this a little bit last time I was on the TLJ podcast, was working on some guiding principles about how and when we speak to politically charged moments in our culture.
Yeah.
And I think this is a really great example because on a few different levels. One is that we are in a moment right now where pastors can't win when it comes to um, other people's reactivity. No matter what you say or don't say, is going to is not going to check everyone's boxes. So if my moral compass is, or my compass for what is the right thing to do is other people's positive responses to me, well, what do you do if you're sitting in a room and they have competing and conflicting expectations of you? And that's the environment we're in.
Yeah.
And for a long time, um, at least in my church, it's be smart and wise, but let's try not to needlessly offend. Like, let's not rock the boat or ruffle feathers if we can avoid it. And what ended up happening, maybe unintentionally, is we outsourced how well we're doing in those moments where we're saying something to other people's responses
Mm.
rather than rather than having a clear set of guiding principles about here's when and how we determine what we're going to say, and then the feedback loop to evaluate how we're doing is, did we stay true to those
Yeah. Hmm.
versus did someone else freak out and should we have done it differently?
Yeah, did someone else freak out is probably never a very good measuring stick there. But to go back to something you said a minute ago, it's hard for me to imagine Jesus going around saying, I just can't win. I mean,
Yes.
because, I just don't think that's where his focus was, on how other people were reacting. He was just so he just so beautifully went around. When we say focusing on self, people get kind of reactive. They're like, no, we're Christians. We're not supposed to be about ourselves, right? Joy, Jesus, others, put
Yes.
yourself last. But, you know, we're not talking about focusing on self in a selfish way. We're talking about focusing on self in the sense of how do I keep my focus on what I actually have control over, on what my own guiding principles, mission, vision are in the world. And that's what Jesus just did so beautifully. And I just don't think that he was kind of scanning to see how people were taking it and then adjusting based on the polls, right?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a good maybe clarifier, because sometimes the objection could be, it sounds like what you're saying is just selfish. And I would say, no, we're not talking about selfishness. We're talking about clarity.
Mm,
And those two are different. And yet the clarity I'm asking leaders to reach is hard work. It
yeah.
is very hard work to really take time to reflect and think through, especially if you're doing this in a team model. What are our guiding principles on this? What do we really think and believe? What are convictions on this, and how do those show up? That's a lot of work.
That's a lot
And
of work. And then when anxiety goes up, to stick to what we said is hard work.
yes,
Mhm.
yeah. So it's a challenge. I think of some of the folks on our staff team. We have an Enneagram 9, and as we've on our staff team, and as we've talked about how we show up together as a staff, he's often one of the more quiet folks.
Mm.
And we've just gotten curious about that. And oftentimes he will just confess, I don't know what I think. It is really hard for me to go, I'm not wanting to contribute. I'm just still sitting there going, what do I really think about this? You know?
Yeah. But some of
And
those people who are quick to talk, they don't know what they really think either.
right,
They
they're
just
just verbal barfing.
yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Yeah, so that's what we mean by focus on self. And I think Jesus really does give us points to this. I think about, for example, take the beam out of your own eye before you address the speck in someone else's.
mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
you know, after the resurrection, when he says, what difference does it make to you, Peter, what John does?
Yeah, yeah,
Telling
that's a good one. Yep,
right? Just
yep.
I think Jesus maybe points to maybe his own guiding principle about this. I know that for me personally, and I also see this in the organizations I'm part of, whether we're talking about from a family to a congregation to a business, when anxiety gets high, I immediately focus on what is everybody else doing? Should they be doing that? Why are they doing that? How do we stop them from doing that? Um, let me stop and judge them for doing that.
Mm-hmm,
And all my attention is out there on, what those people are doing and to flip that. And I have kind of an 80-20 rule. I mean, I'll still give myself 20 or 30%,
yeah.
can still be looking out there, but to try to get it to about 70 or 80% where my focus is not on whose fault is this or what are other people doing about this, but for me, the magic question for myself is, given that this is happening, how do I want to show up?
Mm-hmm.
That's my magic question. How do you orient yourself back to yourself?
That's a great question. Um, I think sometimes it helps to have those moments where you realize there's nothing I can do to fix this.
Mm, mhm.
There's nothing I can do to fix this. Sort of takes the wind out of the sails that there's something I could do to act on others to change this. One of the influencers for me in this area has been Steve Cuss, because he
Yeah,
started as a chaplain.
yeah,
And when you walk into a situation where there's been some sort of tragedy, you can't fix that. There's no. I lost a friend a few weeks back. He was 42 years old and died suddenly. And um, we discovered afterwards it was an undiagnosed cardiac event. He had a heart condition they didn't know about, but it was totally unanticipated. A wife with two kids who we're really close to, and got the call right away. And Josie and I flew over to her house to be with her. And by the time we arrived, there were cars. All of her family was there.
yeah.
And when we walked into that living room, I mean, it was uh, people were hysterical. I mean, it was intense. In that moment, there's nothing. I mean, those types of moments, it's like there's nothing I can do to change what's just happened.
Yeah.
So all of those defaults that I have to want to fix, to control, to manage, to help other people so that it is a better outcome or whatever. When you're in those moments where you can't, you just have to focus on, okay, I can do my part to be present in a helpful way.
To be present in a helpful way. Because,
Yes.
you can't make things better, but you could make things worse.
Oh yeah.
And
And
I
many
think you
people in
said
the room, I think, were doing things that I would say that might make things worse,
that. Yeah. Hmm.
right?
And so the leader in the room is the person who can stop the reactivity and also that specific reactivity that leaders have, that like I have to
Hmm.
get in here and control this and
Yep.
fix it.
Yep. Yeah. So for us, I remember that looking like quietly praying internally.
Mm, mhm.
Because oftentimes it's not, I can't say anything that's going to solve this or change this. It's not the time to theologize or anything like that. So I just immediately went into a place of like unknown quiet prayer for everybody in the room, and then just sat there with presence. And we kind of took turns sitting next to the wife. And when it was my turn, I sat next to her and allowed her to share what she was thinking and receive that. and spoke good news over her in that moment that she wasn't alone.
Mhm.
And so it's that type of thing where I can't all I can do is be a presence to you that somehow embodies the compassion of Christ in this moment.
And you
Verse
cannot be a presence if you're not focused on centering yourself.
Yes. In another moment, I'll be honest, it shifted for me to total detachment during the funeral. Right before I had to get up and do the closing message, they had a song that was just
Mm.
it was a tearjerker, and I knew there's no way I can actually be present to this song and then get up and speak. And so I don't know if this is healthy or not, Trisha. You can tell me. But in my mind, I'm going, I can't listen to this song. And I just started going to other memories that I had as a kid, like just distracting myself.
Yeah.
And I did that because I said, I want to serve this family. I don't want to be disconnected from their pain, but I can't be swept up into it in a way that I'm unable to lead in this moment.
Well,
Um,
first of all, dissociation can be a beautiful thing.
okay.
And also, I mean, what you're saying was I needed to stay grounded in myself, my reason for being in that room, the things that
Yes.
I needed to say. I needed my focus in that moment to
Yes.
be right here in my own center of gravity.
Yep.
And I think the leader that can do that, even though they're not running around controlling everything and fixing everything, at the end of the day, we recognize that's what leadership is, I think. Um, and being able to sometimes do that as a leader with a group of people. When anxiety gets high and everybody's like buzzing and vibrating,
Hmm. Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
um, in the parking lot, say, or after a
Yep.
meeting,
Yep. The
or
meeting after the meeting.
yeah, lots of different contexts where that happens. And to be able to let that go for a little while because we do have to offload some of that. But the really gifted leaders are then able to come in and they don't come in and announce it. They don't say, okay, we need to focus on the future. There's
Hmm.
enough of that. They just come in with the quiet question.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
what's our job here?
Hmm.
Or, you know, given that our mission is X,
Yep.
what happens next? What's
Yep.
our next right step?
Yep.
Um, to just be able to focus everybody back on self. So,
Yep. Yep. We've there's sort of two of the health influencing responses that Steinke names that I think very much focus on self. The first one is focus on self, not on others. But the other one that I found to complement that one was integrity, not unity,
mm,
which I think in Bowen's theory kind of brings or highlights that togetherness force versus the individuality force and elevates once again that the focus has to be your own integrity.
um,
In other words, your own consistency or alignment or ability to live into those guiding principles or your convictions or how you're defining yourself, and not at the expense of giving up self to others, which is, I think, something we see Jesus doing all the time. There's so many situations in the Gospels where you see people trying to act on him or pull him in different directions. And sometimes he goes with the flow. There's times when people make requests of him and that request aligns with and he goes. And there's other times where despite incredible pressure or even momentum, he defines himself and sets out in a different direction, often to the frustration of those around him or confusion.
yeah, and that idea of integrity, I mean, in English, right, it's related to the word for integrate, it's
Hmm.
related to the word for integer, wholeness, bringing all the parts together in a sense of wholeness. And if we don't have that, and we're fragmented and we're spinning, um, and we're focused on either how do I jump in and produce unity by going along, getting along, right? Who do you need me to be? Or produce unity by trying to make everybody else conform to something.
Yes.
That kind of unity doesn't work.
Right. Yeah, and oftentimes when we do try to pursue that kind of unity, we're relying on sort of techniques and strategies to fix something rather than who we want to be in that moment. I had a situation recently where we had a couple show up on Sunday morning. We have two services, and in between services, they announced that they're leaving in our foyer, and this was their time to say goodbyes. And their goodbyes weren't just, "Hey, we're leaving." It was, "Here are all the reasons we're leaving." And
That's rough.
yeah, it wasn't fun. Our leadership team, several leadership team members were present and began to attend to them, listen to them, talk with them. And this led to, a debrief, a feedback loop at our next leadership team meeting about why this couple left and so on and so forth. And the general consensus was they were politically fused to the right. They left when I prayed for peace when the conflict in Iran broke out. And I tried to do that in a very, what I thought to be Jesus centered way, that Jesus is the Prince of Peace. We're called to be peacemakers. God's kingdom doesn't run on violence, that type of a thing. And I prayed. And they thought that that was a sort of an anti-Trump moment, which maybe I'm being a little snarky here, but I found a little bit confusing given that he wants to be the Nobel Peace Prize winner and stuff like that. But that was besides the point. I didn't say any of that.
You are also very much not a mouthpiece for the left. So.
Right. Anyway, so they left, and we were at our leadership team meeting talking about it, and I noticed that everybody wanted to talk about the content of their reasons and sort of stay on that level. What were their reasons for leaving, and are they legitimate or not?
Yeah.
Right. And we can do that. I think that is important work to consider the mental models that people are bringing to the table and how do those intersect with ours. And there's something we need to strengthen or change in us. Sure. But then I just began to ask the question, where did you notice anxiety showing up? And more specifically, as that anxiety spread to you, what did you do? What did you do?
Yeah.
And to me, that was my attempt to kind of reclaim or shift the focus from, hey, we're not just talking about how we're doing politically as navigating political polarity in these moments or as a church. To me, the deeper issue was there was a lot of anxiety in this moment, and each of us related to that differently. And I wonder what were you able to live into your guiding principles based on what we've been talking about and growing as a team in that moment? Did we do that?
Yeah. And that's an integrating move. That's an integrity move.
Right.
Where unity doesn't mean chasing them down and bringing them back, or organizing ourselves in a way that makes us feel better by judging them or analyzing them or diagnosing them or.
Yeah, I think the impulse in that moment is to somehow assuage them, sort of try to keep us all together to preserve some sense of unity. Okay.
Yeah.
And what I was, at least how I was orienting to it is, I have a set of guiding principles for when anxiety spikes. And so this is less a moment about how do I keep the whole thing together and instead stay true to how I want to be present in moments like these.
Yeah.
And at least for me, it ended up being a little bit of a different, I challenged the outcome. I challenged the outcome because I was proud of our leadership team for being present to this couple. But I also had some strong words for, I don't know if we led very well in that moment. Because perhaps it's not okay for people to be able to stand in our foyer lobbing accusations on a Sunday morning. In other words, what does it look like to have some boundaries for the sake of a strong immune system as a church, right?
And boundaries are one of the key ways that the immune system is supposed to work. And it's hard in that integrity and unity conversation. It's hard because on the one hand, healthy systems are not about conformity. In our bodies, we need cells that are very different from each other. Paul in Corinthians tells us, we need the eye and the ear and the foot and the
Yes,
hand, right? And so on the one hand, we need a lot of not just tolerance for, but appreciation for the differences among us.
I would say explicit permission and
Yes.
encouragement. Yeah.
And at the same time, a sense of this is who we are, this is what we're about.
Hmm.
One of the ways I think about that sometimes is, I don't think the American Heart Association spends a lot of time worrying that they're not working on all the other diseases that people
Yeah.
face. They're very clear. We are about hearts. And, you've got all the other organizations, you've got the Cancer Society and the Lung Association and so forth. And we're not saying that those things aren't integrated. Obviously, they are. But a sense of, I think that differentiation of self, what we call emotional maturity, is about being able to say, this is who I am. This is where I stand. This is what I believe and want and will do or not do. In a group context, this is what's okay here and what's not okay. This is what's consistent with who we are and where we're going. And getting that balance right, where we don't default to no unity means that we all have to think the same way.
Hmm.
But at the same time, we don't go to the other extreme that says we have no boundaries.
Right.
And
Right.
that's tough. I mean,
That's
I think
tricky.
even the Apostle Paul and others in the book of Acts, I'm teaching Acts to 12 and 13-year-olds right now. And just, to be able to kind of see how they were trying to figure that out. What's in bounds and what's out of bounds, and how do we know? And then what do we do when things that are out of bounds happen? But that's what this process is. That's why we do the hard work of the guiding principles.
Yeah. Steinke names that there's two places or ways that anxiety causes, I would say, is one is like precipitating anxiety, which is outside of your environment. So there's anxiety influences outside of your church that come in.
Mhm.
That's what politics is all about, right? But then there's sort of that internal anxiety that you bring, the contributing anxiety that you bring in because of what's happening in you. And I think what we're trying to name in this first episode is there's sort of maybe two responses that help manage either one of those.
Mhm.
And it's first focusing on yourself rather than others. And then second, as you focus on yourself, it's about integrity, not first and foremost conformity.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good place to land, knowing that we've still got 5 more to go, right?
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
2 more conversations, one about how we relate to others, and then one about looking at the system. Um, but for our listeners, you've got a couple weeks till the next one drops for you to work on your own self. How are you going to integrate toward wholeness for your own integrity? And how are you going to keep the focus on yourself and not on others? So you can work on that. If you want to practice with a coach or you're just interested in how this works, let us know, theleadersjourney.us for that. Come over to Facebook or Instagram and jump in on the conversation. That's what the comments are there for. We would love to hear from you. And we'll see you next time. Take care.